I have sat in this chair for more than 30 years. I have heard every excuse, every manipulation, and every performance of innocence that the human mind is capable of producing. I have tried my best to dispense justice with the understanding that the law is not a weapon for the powerful and a wall for everyone else. It is the same law applied the same way to every single person who walks through that door. But never in 3 decades on this bench did I expect a United States senator to walk into my courtroom, call me by my first name, and inform me as though it were a simple matter of scheduling that my career was something he could end with a phone call. That morning didn't just test my patience. It tested the very foundation of what this courtroom is built to protect. Because what happened wasn't just a legal confrontation. It was a direct assault on the principle that makes this bench mean anything at all. And if you believe, as I do, as I've always believed, that the law applies to everyone, whether you're selling preserves at a Saturday market or writing legislation on Capitol Hill, then you need to hear every word of this story. If you love seeing entitlement, walk into the wrong room and find out exactly where it is. Do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. You are not going to want to miss a second of what comes next. It was a sharp Monday morning in November. The kind of cold that gets into the building before you do. I walked into the courtroom at 8:50 a.m., coffee in hand, expecting the usual organized chaos. People talking to their lawyers, families crowded into the gallery rows, the low hum of a room full of people with problems they're hoping someone can solve. But today, the room was wrong. Completely unnervingly silent. The kind of silence that tells you something has already happened before you arrived. I looked at my clerk, Michael. He was standing rather than sitting, which he never does, and his face was the color of chalk. He didn't say good morning. He didn't hand me anything. He simply looked toward the gallery and said very quietly, "Judge, front row." I put on my glasses and looked up. Sitting in the public gallery, right where ordinary people sit, right where the families and the witnesses and the court watchers sit, was a man in a dark navy suit that had not been purchased anywhere in this city. On his lapel, an American flag pin. Behind him, 2 aides and a personal attorney arranged like furniture. He was sitting with the particular stillness of someone who has already decided how the morning ends. And he was looking at my bench like a man who had come to collect something that belonged to him. It was Senator Victor Caldwell, 3 terms in office, presidential ambitions, the kind of political capital that makes staffers lower their voices when his name comes up. And he was staring at my bench like a man who had come to collect something that belonged to him. I looked down at the docket. The name on the file read, Natalie Caldwell, age 26. Aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, fleeing the scene of an accident. His daughter, what he didn't know, what he was about to find out, was that he had walked into the wrong courtroom. I banged the gavel and called the session to order. The bailiff announced the case. I looked toward the prosecutor's table, ready to begin. Senator Caldwell stood up. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't ask to be recognized. He didn't do any of the things that every other human being in that room understood were required of them the moment they walked through those doors. He simply stood, buttoned his jacket with the unhurried ease of a man adjusting before a board meeting, and walked through the swinging gate into the well of my courtroom. The space that belongs to attorneys, defendants, and officers of the court, and to no one else without my permission. My bailiff took a step forward. I held up one finger. I wanted to hear this. The senator stopped in front of my bench and looked up at me with a smile that I can only describe as patient. The smile of someone who is accustomed to people understanding things without needing to be told twice. He clasped his hands in front of him, and then he said, "Your Honor," except the way he said it made it sound like anything but. The words were technically correct, yet the tone carried none of the weight they were meant to hold. It came out the way you'd address a colleague you've decided is junior to you, polite enough on the surface, dismissive underneath, the kind of courtesy that's really just condescension wearing a tie. "This case," he said, "is a politically motivated mischaracterization of a minor traffic incident involving my daughter. I think we both know that. I sit on the Federal Judiciary Oversight Committee, and I have a genuine interest in seeing that the resources of this court are directed toward matters that actually warrant them." He paused. The smile didn't move. "I would simply encourage you to consider the implications of how this morning proceeds for everyone involved." He said it calmly, pleasantly, the way you'd recommend a restaurant. There was no raised voice, no pointed finger. Not yet, just the smooth, ambient pressure of a man who has spent 3 terms in office learning that the most effective threats are the ones that don't sound like threats at all. I took my glasses off. I set them on the bench in front of me very deliberately, the way I do when I need my hands free and my eyes clear and every person in the room to understand that what comes next will not be negotiated. The gallery did not make a sound, not one. I told the senator to return behind the bar, or I would have him removed in the same tone I use for everything in this room. Level final, not interested in discussion. He held my gaze for a moment longer than was wise, then turned and walked back to the front row with the deliberate calm of a man who had decided to try a different approach. He sat down. He crossed one leg over the other. He was not finished, but neither was I. I turned to the prosecutor's table. Mr. Webb, please, proceed. Marcus Webb stood up, and I will tell you plainly that the young man looked like he was holding himself together through sheer force of professional obligation. He was 28 years old, 8 months into his first prosecutorial position. He had prepared for this case, and he had not prepared for the senator. And the difference between those two things was written across his face in a way that everyone in that gallery could read. His hands holding his notes were not steady, but he stood up. That matters. He stood up anyway up. Your Honor, he began, his voice finding its footing as he went.
I have sat on this bench for over 30 years. In that time, I have heard every excuse a person can invent, every carefully rehearsed denial, every performance designed to blur the line between guilt and innocence. I have watched people cry when it suited them, remain silent when it benefited them, and twist the truth into something almost unrecognizable. And through all of it, I have held on to one belief. The law is not a weapon for the powerful, and it is not a wall meant to keep everyone else out. It is the same law, applied the same way, to every single person who walks through that door. But never in 3 decades did I expect a United States senator to walk into my courtroom, look me in the eye, call me by my first name, and calmly suggest that my career could disappear with a single phone call. That morning did not just test my patience. It tested the very foundation of what this courtroom is supposed to stand for. It was a sharp, cold Monday morning in November, the kind of cold that settles into the walls before anyone arrives. I walked into the courthouse at 8:50 a.m., coffee in hand, expecting the usual rhythm of the day, lawyers conferring in hushed tones, families filling the gallery, the quiet tension of people waiting for their turn to be heard. Instead, I walked into silence. Not the ordinary quiet of a courtroom before proceedings begin, but something heavier, something deliberate, the kind of silence that tells you something has already happened. My clerk, Michael, was standing. He never stands. His face had lost all color. He didn't greet me, didn't hand me the docket. He simply looked toward the gallery and said, almost under his breath, "Judge Front Row." I followed his gaze, and there he was. A man in a perfectly tailored navy suit, an American flag pin fixed neatly to his lapel. He sat in the front row, not like a spectator, but like a man waiting for a meeting to begin. Behind him, 2 aides and a personal attorney stood in quiet formation, still, controlled, certain. Senator Victor Caldwell, 3 terms in office, national influence, the kind of name that makes people lower their voices when they say it. And he was looking at my bench as though it belonged to him. I lowered my gaze to the file in front of me. Natalie Caldwell, age 26, aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, fleeing the scene of an accident. His daughter. The session began. The prosecutor, Marcus Webb, stood. Young, barely settled into his role, but prepared. I could see the tension in his hands, the way his fingers held the papers just a little too tightly. But he stood, and that mattered. He began outlining the events of that Saturday morning. A crowded farmer's market, a pedestrian zone, families, vendors, elderly residents. The kind of place where people expect safety without thinking about it. Natalie Caldwell drove straight through it. Witnesses estimated her speed at 35 to 40 miles per hour. 4 people were injured. One of them was Dorothy Okafor, 71 years old, a retired school teacher. A woman who spent her weeks preparing homemade preserves and baked goods to sell every Saturday morning. 6 months of work, gone in seconds. When she approached the vehicle, not in anger, but concern, Natalie stepped out and struck her, hard enough to fracture her cheekbone, hard enough to send her to the hospital for 4 days. As this was being read into the record, I watched Natalie. She didn't react. Not to the injuries, not to the name, not to the consequences. She sat there, dressed impeccably, surrounded by high-powered attorneys, and looked down at her phone. That told me everything I needed to know. Then the senator stood. No request, no acknowledgement of protocol. He walked straight into the well of the courtroom, the space reserved for officers of court, as if the rules simply did not apply to him. He spoke calmly, smoothly, politely, too politely. He described the case as a misunderstanding, a minor incident exaggerated for effect. Then, without ever raising his voice, he suggested that continuing this case might have implications. Not a threat, not directly, but unmistakable. I removed my glasses, set them down, and told him, clearly and without hesitation, to return to his seat or be removed. He held my gaze for a moment too long. Then he turned and walked back. But I knew he wasn't finished. During recess, everything changed. When court resumed, Marcus Webb looked different, not shaken by the case, but by something else entirely. So I asked him a simple question. Did anyone approach you during the break? He hesitated. For seconds of silence. In a courtroom, for seconds is not empty. It is a decision being made. Then he answered, yes. The senator had approached him in the hallway and suggested that if the charges were dismissed, he could influence another matter in the prosecutor's favor. 3 witnesses present, names recorded, clear, direct, undeniable. In that moment, the case transformed. This was no longer just about what happened at a farmer's market. This was about whether the law could be bent openly inside the very room meant to uphold it. I looked at the senator. The confidence was still there, but thinner now. I gave the order. He was arrested on the spot. No raised voice. No hesitation. Handcuffs closed around his wrists in front of a silent courtroom. And just like that, the most powerful man in the room wasn't anymore. Then I turned back to the case. Natalie Caldwell was denied bail. Her passport was seized. Additional charges were noted, and for the first time, she looked up, not with remorse, with fear. The verdict, when it came, was not complicated. Guilty on all counts. 2 years in prison, community service, psychological evaluation, a public acknowledgement of responsibility, consequences not symbolic, but real. Dorothy Okafor stood and walked to the center of the room. She didn't demand justice. She didn't ask for anything more. She simply said, "You saw me," and she was right, because that is what this courtroom is meant to do, to see people, not titles, not influence, not power, people. The aftermath moved quickly. Footage of the arrest spread across the country within hours. Investigations followed, and what they uncovered extended far beyond a single case. Years of interference, suppressed reports, abuse of influence. In the end, the senator was sentenced to decades in federal prison, not because of politics, but because the law, when it works, does not make exceptions. Later that day, I looked at the clock, straightened the file, and called the next case a simple parking violation, because the law does not pause for power, and it does not bend for influence. It either applies to everyone, or it means nothing at all.